You ready to do this thing?
Let's get into it.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Sweaty Casuals, brought to you by the Snowflake Sanctuary's Discord server. This is the podcast where we usually talk about gaming. I'm going to have to look at my notes because I forgot how things work, and I don't have a second monitor right now. Games we love to play from State of Rank systems, to our thoughts on the news sensations, and everything in between. My name is Zach. This is my co-host, Knox. And we're going to be your guides as we traverse Elo Hell.
And you guys were making fun of me last week for not knowing the intro and the outro by heart. Good grief.
To be fair, it wasn't them. Today we're joined by Taskless and by Paradox Muse, and we're going to be discussing the Overwatch Director's Take that came out, discussing the topic of 5v5 versus 6v6. Our icebreaker... Gee, I wonder where Taskless leaves. Let's come up with an icebreaker, because I didn't think of one before the show today. Which Apex character would you not want to run into in a coffee shop?
Revenant.
Ooh. Any particular reason why?
Can you imagine walking into a Starbucks and seeing that?
Get out of my way, meatbag.
just like I feel like most of them, when you if they were in like street clothes and you walked into a Starbucks, like you wouldn't think twice. There's a few that I think would get second looks. He's definitely one of them. I have a few others on my list, but
it's a good number of them that we get second looks, like Bloodhound.
yep.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's another one.
Bloodhound would get a second look, but would it really be that bad?
It depends on which, the Starbucks that he's in, you know? Let's be real. If he's in, a Midwest Starbucks, probably not. If he's in, any
he's
other
just
Starbucks,
chilling in the corner, petting a crow.
Oh, true. Facts. So.
What about you, Task?
I've never played Apex. I don't know any of the characters. So I'm looking up the sexiest Apex characters right now. And apparently people really like Watson and Loba.
Okay, I was going to say Loba's the one that I know ends up topping that list time and time again. The Watson didn't expect that one.
Watson's very cute.
Yeah. She is cute.
Yep.
I feel like Octane would be a weird one to run into.
Heard of Octane. Is that the one with the grappling stuff?
Nope, no, that's Pathfinder.
Pathfinder, interesting.
Octane runs real fast. I feel like Octane, if you ran into him, he'd probably be blowing by you as he's running out the door.
Pathfinder's just a Boston Dynamics robot. Escaped.
Yes.
So I think that one's fine.
I feel like Alter, if you ran into her on the West Coast, you wouldn't think twice, but definitely in the Midwest, you'd get a second look.
Who's this chick with pink hair?
Yeah, right.
Oh gosh, the guy who throws the gas traps would be mine.
Caustic.
Yeah. And I'd like to order that with another variable.
Good lord. Well, getting into our topic tonight, obviously in the last week, Overwatch CEO Aaron Keller
Game director.
I struggled with that one. Game director released a director's take about the conversation surrounding 5v5 versus 6v6 for Overwatch. And as he makes a joke about within it, it is a thesis. It is a book. It took me a good 20 minutes to read through.
It is a good read. I'll put it down on the doobly-doo.
Yes. Definitely, if you haven't read it yourself, I know I took the time to read it before I went and listened to anybody's opinion on it, because I wanted to get the fresh read. So if you haven't read it yet and you're listening to us, go read it and come back. But it goes through, it spends the first, I would say, 30% of it going through the history behind their big game changes, which included changes such as limiting heroes in game, so you couldn't have 5 tracers or 6 tracers or 6 Reinhardts or 6 Zenyatas or however many of each you wanted to have. The next change came when they switched from everything being the open queue to role queue. within competitive and quick play, switching to the 2v2 or 2-2-2 model within the game. And then finally, as they transitioned into 5v5 versus 6v6 with the launch of Overwatch 2. They then go into their reasons as to why they switched to 5v5. They stated that they wanted to go to a more FPS game. They wanted to kind of go away from their more MOBA roots and go to more of an FPS, which 5v5 opened the door for that. They also talked about the queue times, which is one of the biggest and most concrete pieces of evidence they have for this change as to why it has helped the game in their eyes.
Mhm.
Anything else I'm missing? I know those were the two big ones.
Those were the really big two reasons that they gave in there. I think that we can all agree that these are reasons that we've discussed here on the show. If you haven't seen our last video on this discussion, I'll put it up in the top right. But even within the community, like we've all talked about how queue times in Overwatch 1 were significantly different.
Well, and they
Yep.
brought up a good point too, without getting too deep into the queue times right away. Something that I hadn't quite thought through in my head that does make sense is like queue time is not decided by how many people are on the game at once. Queue time is decided by how many people are playing the least popular role.
Yep.
So there can be 10 million DPS players, but if there's only 4 tank players, then only 2 games are running.
Mhm.
So that makes a lot of sense. They also talked a lot about how tank synergy was sometimes fun, but it could also bring the game to like a screeching halt in terms of balance.
Mm.
When you have
Yep.
metas such as double shield that were so incredibly strong that it's hard to work around that and balance that. They also talked about how damage players complained that their role didn't feel impactful
Yep.
within the game, and that the game was run by the supports and run by the tank players, and that they were sitting in 20-minute queues to be in a game that they didn't feel like they had a big impact in. Another thing that they cited, which I thought was interesting and didn't quite agree with, at least at the lower part of the ladder, kind of that gold plat level in which 6v6 games were so much slower to the point where things didn't start moving until ultimates came online, which I thought was interesting that they had that take.
Mhm.
But after they cited why they did it, they also went in and put in their thoughts on 6v6. They cited that 6v6, they felt like there was too much visual clutter to having 6 players on each team rather than 5. They talked about tracking, like alt tracking is easier with only 9 other players to keep track of instead of 11. They talked about that while 6v6 came with some really, really high points in terms of like alt combos and big plays, there also had some really low moments that some of those tank synergies playing into the ultimate combos kind of made the game feel awful if you were on the losing side of that.
Mhm.
And while there was highs and lows with 6v6, 5v5 kind of, while there's not as big of highs, there's not as low of lows, and kind of stabilized in the middle. And then finally, they talked about what was next, which this brought the biggest surprise to me in reading all of this, because at least for me, when I first read this, I expected to get this really, really long, here's why we did it, to be finished up with the, we addressed it and we don't care. And that but they did say that they are working right now with some experimental changes that they want to implement for a short time for a testing in which they're going to bring 6v6 back. They talked about running different quick play hacked events to try different changes to the 5v5 format to see if that makes any differences. But the fact that they're even working on a 6v6 game mode makes me excited to try it again, and that they're going to run it for more than a couple of days, which is good too, because you don't want nostalgia to kick in too much if you only get that for a short amount of time.
Mm.
They also said that this is going to take a while to come out as Overwatch 2 is optimized and graphics are better and things are different in the way that introducing 2 new players to each team is going to put stress on people's computers in terms of running the game, and they don't want that to be a detriment to players that have maybe less high-end computers. So that they're working on trying to have the game at a level so that they can all run that again. How was my synopsis?
Pretty darn good. I think you pretty much nailed it right on the head.
Thank you.
So let's just kind of step back and let's take it step by step. I know most of us have been on the show and discussed this topic specifically. So we know, Paradox, you're in the 5v5 camp. You specifically have a lot of esports reasons that you think it's better that way. Nox, you're in the 5v5 camp generally.
I teeter on the day.
But it comes from your DPS background.
Yep. And my support background too, I would argue.
Yeah. Task, you haven't gotten a chance, so let's you've already said that you'll want 6v6. You want to go into that and talk about it really quick?
I don't know that I want 6v6 long term. I think that 6v6 was a lot of fun. I think that they did a lot of things well when they had 6v6, and it ran stably and effectively for a long time. There's a lot of things that need to be said about the switch from Overwatch 1 to Overwatch 2 that doesn't have to do just with 6v6 versus 5v5. And I think that a lot of the nostalgia that we have for Overwatch 1 won't come back just because we have 6v6. Some of the maps aren't going to come back, and that's probably healthy. I think a lot of the 2CPs were the least liked maps.
You don't miss Horizon Lunar Colony?
No.
I want to play Hanamura one more time.
I did not like Hanamura that much. But then just like Anubis was bad. Volskaya was not fun.
Volskaya was the worst one. That's a hot take.
Volskaya was rough. That choke was awful.
Yeah.
Both of them were.
Anubis was usually seen as like the best 2CP map, though. Like
no,
and that's
like
saying
Anubis.
something. Yeah,
I felt like there were flank routes you could take. It's just the points were very centralized, which did feel a little rough.
Yeah. I don't know. Anubis was pretty rough too. Especially as someone who didn't always play in groups that were like play with people in a group going in. I like to play a lot just on my own, random matchmaking. I'll take what I get with other people. It can be really rough having to kind of jump into that and go through difficult chokes without a good game plan when most of the people either weren't in voice chat or just weren't interested in listening to a game plan, coming up with something together. So that said, I think there's a lot of things that I liked about 6v6, whether it was the tank synergies, which I think were a good part of the game for the most part, or that was just the different playstyles that you had available. That nowadays it does feel very much like it's one tank who has a lot to do, and then it's just a DPS playground. And I'm sure that's very nice for you, Nox, but
look, I've been playing a lot of quick play support, and obviously the games down there there's a little less, like the other team's not as coordinated, we're not as coordinated. It's a lot of a playground for everybody because anyone can just kind of go do what they want. So I don't necessarily do this a lot in comp, but even just the amount, I've just been doing support. The amount of times I've played Iari and had gold damage, or played Ana and had gold damage, like this 5v5 has turned into a playground for everybody but the tank, in my opinion, because of the way that supports are being balanced right now too.
Yeah, I would say the supports definitely have a much bigger role in terms of their damage output, and just in terms of contributing to kills, contributing to that. I think that with the lack of the additional tank, there isn't that necessity for support, for focus on healing and focus on keeping people alive. I think there's a lot more options to do different things with the supports, and that's interesting and it's fun, but it also changes the game in a big way. When I'm thinking of a DPS playground, I had like 3 or 4 games today that were decided by who had the better hit scan players, which, I mean, there's a lot of games that are like that, and I don't feel like Overwatch necessarily needs to be one of them. That hit scan has never been the most fun thing about Overwatch. I think it's a good thing to have be strong, but it shouldn't be the best and the most important thing. And then I think
let's delve into that a little bit,
Mhm.
because one of the things that they did discuss in the director's take was, when the game came out, it was an FPS MOBA, and they really tried
Mhm.
to focus on, let's balance these two different things, that these kind of wildly different game styles, and try and condense them into something that is both. And as we've gone into Overwatch 2 and 5v5, we've focused less on the MOBA aspects and made it much, much more of an FPS game.
Mhm.
Do we think that the game was better or had better qualities when it was more MOBA like?
Hmm.
I think so, because now you're competing with a different audience and kind of carving out your own niche rather than trying to fight for the same players that Valorant are fighting for the same players that Apex, Counter-Strike, right? With the advent of CS2, with Valorant's popularity, you're going to lose a lot of just the general FPS players. When I'm looking at like the general audience of recruiting for collegiate at this point, I'm not looking at 18-year-olds anymore for Overwatch. It's my 18-year-olds. They're doing Valorant, they're playing CS, they're playing Rocket League, they're playing Smash, they're playing pretty much any game but Overwatch. I have like 20 18-year-old kids coming in now for their freshman year for League of Legends even. But I have no one coming in right now for Overwatch. It's not a popular game with the youth anymore, if you will.
Mhm.
Like it's just that's not what they're playing. And the reason is because if they're going to play a MOBA, they're going to play League. And if they're going to play an FPS, they're not going to play Overwatch, right? They're kind of in that two camp where when it was much more of that MOBA Venn diagram, you could get that crossover from both sides and then end up having somebody that says, hey, like, this is my new favorite game because I didn't realize that I did want this FPS aspect of it, right? You have the people like me who I never can aim. That's why I don't really play FPS games. I've never trained my aim. I've never, been a big aim person in general. So I'm going to play Reinhardt. I'm going to play Moira, and I'm going to have fun when I play those characters because I really don't have to aim on either of those characters, right? So when you had that MOBA aspect, it still just had a little bit more of a strong dynamic, especially with Doomfist. Like Doomfist is still very much a MOBA-esque character more than an FPS character at heart, but just it's devolved into the better DPS for the most part. They tried with when they got down to the one tank and focusing and making the one tank that juggernaut, and nobody had fun with that type of Overwatch. It's how it needed to be if you're going to go from 6v6 to 5v5, but sadly it didn't happen. And now they're trying to balance with, hey, we're trying to make the tank role more fun by giving them more stuff, because they even say in that blog post too that the reason they cut the tank down is because not enough people were playing tank. Just straight up, not enough people were playing tank. Queues were getting too long. They didn't have the player base for it. So let's try and make tank a fun role, giving them the juggernaut. Hey, it's not that fun, right? Not everybody's having fun. The only person who's having fun is the better tank player. So let's nerf it. Let's start doing. They even talked about like some of the 6v6 nerfs, which is like DPS can damage enemy and reduce their healing received now.
Yep.
So
Yes.
it's minus 10% on tanks and minus 20% on non-tanks. So if you get dinked by like any spray at this point, you're just going to have massive reduced healing now. And then tank all generation is now reduced by 40%. They have reduced knockback by 40%. Who cares, right? For the most part. And reduced
Lucio
damage.
players do.
Yeah, I was gonna say Lucio players care a
Oh,
lot. That's why
darn.
Lucio's like actually like
Yeah.
super
Oh,
buffed right now
darn.
for
So
his-
Lucio. Yes. So fine. We nerfed to Lucio with that. Great. And then reduce damage from critical hits by 25%. That's pretty significant, right? I think if you're gonna put a tank, so I'm gonna finish this last point and then I'm gonna let somebody else speak because I feel bad. But when I look at Counter-Strike and I look at Valorant, both of those games have a similar problem to Overwatch, where there is a dominant role, duelist for Valorant, and then it's typically like IGL for Counter-Strike. Those are kind of your two ones that everybody wants to do. Everybody thinks they're the best in that role, and it's because it is the role that they feel they can carry the most in. With Overwatch, it's DPS, right? Everybody wants to play DPS. That's always been the most fun role. But in the other games, the other roles are necessary but still fun. Whereas The tank role, it becomes questionable if it is actually necessary to continue playing the game.
Especially if they want to move more towards an FPS.
Exactly.
Now, I haven't been able to play this season. Who has been able to play this season? Because I know they basically just giga buffed every single tank.
Like I said, I've been in a lot of quick play, so my perception I think is a little bit different because there's a little less stress, there's a little less kind of a critical look at the state of the game when you're playing quick play.
Yeah.
I would say it's felt the same as it has. I think tanks are living longer, which is solid. But like I said, I've been playing a lot of support and quick play, and I feel like the most powerful person on the battlefield every single time I walk out there, even if I'm playing Ana in the back. So take that for what that's worth. I still don't think that's super healthy for the game. But I would say the buffs that came out for tanks earlier in the season, while they were scary and we all looked at them and went, "What did they do to the game?" I don't think it's been as dramatic as what it originally felt like it was going to be.
Mhm.
Task, I don't know if you have any second thoughts on that.
I think that's right for the most part. I think that tank does feel like a more critical role where the things you do matter and the space that you create is important for your team. You're more of a threat now than you used to be, and it doesn't feel like you're just kind of
The punching bag.
You're not the punching bag. You're not just going around and hoping to get healed. It's you have a role. You're doing something. What you're doing is important, and you're able to do it. That said, it still feels like they don't want to take anything away from the DPS or the supports, and I think that makes sense for the large part of their player base, but I'm not sure that it's healthy long term for the game. And I think back to what Paradox was saying, that yes, you can make it more of an FPS, and that might satisfy some of your player base more than what they're seeing now with MOBA aspects, but you're not going to get people who are looking for an FPS. Like, you're never going to get that crowd. And I don't think we should aim for that crowd. I don't think Overwatch should aim for that crowd. I think that Overwatch has always had something a little bit strange, a little bit unique about it, a little bit more, I don't want to say twisted, but off the rails. Something unique, something fun. I think they should lean into that, even if it doesn't. I don't want to say optimize the experience for the majority of their player base with supports and DPS. I think that it just doesn't. You don't need to create such a silver platter catering. What's the word? When you're like really going over above and beyond to cater to someone's needs. Zach, you got
Fan
this.
service?
Max? No, that sounds sexual.
No, but it's interesting that you bring up the like pleasing their player base, because they did mention that in the director's take. They mentioned that this was specifically surrounding the ultimate decision on whether or not they're going to go back to 5v or back to 6v6 or stay 5v5. But they talked about how their player base has grown since Overwatch 2 has come out, which it has. It's a free to play game now. You have a new crowd in, but they don't want to upset or disservice the people that like 5v5 or the people that only know Overwatch as 5v5. And I think it's interesting that like there is such a diverse player base for this game because of the diverse gameplay it always offered. Like Paradox, like he said, doesn't like to aim. So he plays Reinhardt and Moira and he has fun. I like aim intensive heroes. I enjoy playing Widow and Ashe, and I find that fun about it. People find fun in the Shut up. People find fun in the strategy aspect of how to take space on a map and how different maps play and how to optimize compositions on maps. People like the different compositions you can make within your team. There are so many ways that to play this game, especially when you look at all of the years it's been live, that there is going to be no answer that is going to please everybody. If you have 5v5, people are going to be mad. They want 6v6. If you go back to 6v6, people are going to be mad that it's not still 5v5. You buff this, you nerf that, people are mad.
Hold on to that thought, because I want to go into that whole topic, but I want to do it in like kind of one succinct way, and I think I know how to do it. Let's just touch on queue times, because I know that you said that caught you off guard, and for me as a tank player, I was like, that makes sense. Task, Overwatch 1, how long did you ever wait for a game?
Not that long.
Yeah,
Queue times are okay.
I don't think I ever waited more than like 2 minutes.
Yeah.
If I had an hour and a half between classes in college and I wanted to come home and play an Overwatch game during that time, and I had an hour and a half, I went, well, I'm not playing DPS today, I'll tell you that. Queue for something else.
And it was bad. It was very, very bad, and I do understand the movement to 5v5 for the queue times.
I think that it was just realistic of them. I think that they wanted it to be they wanted the number of people playing tank to enjoy playing tank while not taking away from the other people who just didn't want to play it. And I think that it's a very different experience from playing DPS. It's a very different experience from playing support. If you don't like that experience, you shouldn't be forced to play it. I think that they tried something with towards the end of Overwatch 1, they had those like tokens or something, like priority pass something or other.
Yep.
The tickets or whatever it was.
Yeah.
It would incentivize you to queue for tank, then you could go in with your next DPS game with a priority pass.
Right. And that was like just the idea of that doesn't sit right. Like you're forcing people to play something they don't want to play in order to play the game that they do want to play. And I think that it makes sense that the queue times are a problem, and I think the 5v5 addressed it pretty well.
And let me just tell you, there were some teams during that time that got some shitty tank play from me because I wanted those priority passes. So I think, an overall detriment to the game because it forced people that didn't play tank to go play tank. Yeah. And then game value went down because now you have me playing tank, who plays tank maybe 3 games a season. Doesn't know how to synergize with my other tank. I know how to play D.Va and Zarya, and that's about it.
One thing I would add to that, it also ruined the quality. If
you go,
No. It also ruined the quality of your DPS games or your or support games if you had people who were playing like tank because they were forced to play it. And so you'd be forced to play a role you didn't want to play in order to play a faster game that you did want to play, which would also be ruined by other people playing roles that they didn't want to play. Which just made the whole game less fun for everyone. Go ahead, Paradox.
It's cyclical too, because you have somebody who is playing tank that just to get their priority queue in DPS, and they priority queue into DPS, and then they get somebody who played tank who also wants to get priority queue in their next game, right? So then you just had like a bad experience, and then you just wasted your priority queue because you got somebody that's autofill in tank. And so I will say that a lot of games just have this problem in general, where they have certain roles that are, like less fun. Like in League of Legends, it's top lane. That one is considered kind of like a lower priority, and support kind of go hand in hand with those. At the same time, though, you end up having people that play one character, and that's how they get to Diamond, Masters, GM, those upper ranks for League. And then what they end up doing is they're just like, okay, I'm going to just play that one character in any role. If I got filled into top lane or filled into jungle or filled into support, like I'm going to play that one character in those three lanes and just say, okay, I'm going to go next. You can't do that in Overwatch. If you want to play DPS and you play 2 characters in DPS, and you end up getting thrown into tank, thrown into support, the community in general doesn't incentivize you to play those individual roles. And those individual roles, yes, obviously like the aim skill carries over, but the overall game knowledge of how to play the individual roles isn't transparent between the 3 roles. And that's where you run into that huge problem, is that if you're going to make Overwatch your main game, there isn't a good, like, most people aren't in that realm of I'm going to be good at Overwatch. It's I'm going to be good at DPS in Overwatch. I'm going to be good at, tank in Overwatch. Rather than if you get really good at League of Legends and you're considered a good player in League of Legends, you have a deep understanding of each one of the roles and a deep understanding of how each one of those roles can be played, and play each one of those roles at a, typical top level or a similar level that you can play your main role at.
Right. It is interesting looking at the queue times that besides tank, which did reduce going into Overwatch 2, but for both damage and support, the queue times were reduced by 50% or more, which is insane. I mean, the average queue time for damage in Overwatch 1 post-roll queue, obviously this is all post-roll queue implementation, was 7.6 minutes, and now it's 2.9 minutes. For support, it was 2.8 minutes, and now it's down to 1.4 minutes. Tank, it was 1.8 minutes, down to 1.3 minutes. So everything reduced. Like, I think when you're having this conversation, that's the most damning evidence.
One of the things that I do find super interesting about those numbers in particular is that even though the fact that the tank dropped off a little bit, but not a lot of it, makes me believe that even fewer tanks are actually going out there to play games at this point, which I get.
Well, just mathematically, yes, because if it was 1.8 when you were looking for 2, in theory, it should be, 3.6 if you're looking for 1? Or no?
Well,
now my math's off. Cut that.
But the fact that it seems like there are still, DPS games where people are still waiting and support games where people are still waiting, it makes me think that the player base for tank is even shrunk further than relative-wise, percentage-wise.
I would definitely say I enjoy playing tank even a little bit less in Overwatch 2 than I did in Overwatch 1. Because tank
do you
is
think that has to do with the
play.
camaraderie, though, of being the only one? Like, it's just you?
I've commented on the fact that I miss having a second tank. I liked that playstyle.
Because every other role has someone to rely on. If your Ana gets jumped, you have another support to pick up slack or try to bail somebody out. Your other DPS is off flanking, you can still have one with the group on the front line. If your tank is off doing who knows what, that's it.
Your tank could be having the best game of his life, but the truth of the matter is that if he's pitched up against a tank who's just better, then... And I think that is one of the big fundamental issues with the one tank scenario.
I'm trying to remember I'm trying to remember the word for it too, but it's like the whole pull of any multiplayer game is that perfect frustration, right? Where you can feel, is it my fault that I ended up losing that game, or is it somebody else's fault? And it's easier to blame, the bits and pieces that we see online if we know that we're not playing with our friends. And so being able to blame the other support or blame the other DPS and being like, wow, that Junkrat was bad. Wow, that person was bad. Even when, Zach, when Yumi and Drazel would queue as 3, right when, Drazel was learning the game, we would, it's not your fault, it's not your fault. And then, she'd get flamed in chat, or we were like, oh man, that was a really bad Junkrat. And half the time it was, that DPS was bad, but we aren't being, super self-reflective on what we could have done better. And that's that's how most people get better, is if they start realizing, hey, I need to be self-reflective. At the same time, though, if I'm just trying to have fun with my friends at that point, no, I'm not going to care about being self-reflective. I'm going to play the blame game, blame it on the other person. If I'm the only tank, I don't get to do that. I have to take the responsibility for, yeah, no, we lost because I just got outrhymed. I got, out Orissa'd. It doesn't necessarily matter, out monkeyed, right? And so having that second tank and being able to blame that is pretty important. In a lot of the other games, like for Valorant, you typically have a flex player, and that flex player will do like smokes or entry or something like that. And like having more than one of those people, it's like, okay, you can actually, just blame it on them just losing ones or, just getting unlucky. And there's always someone to blame in those other FPS games. Whereas with Overwatch, because it's so role based, you have to kind of take those blames.
I think, and to tell me, because you're our other tank player here. I think one of the big things that has come out of Overwatch 2 overall, but particularly with this move to 5v5, was that tank became the punching bag because they were super strong and then they're super weak, and they really haven't found a place where they're like kind of in between. And it feels like games often get decided by, hey, we have a tank who can figure out how to accomplish something, or we have a tank who's just basically just getting deleted every single round. Every single
Yeah, there needs to be some balance between there's nothing I can do because that's miserable. You never want to feel like you're playing a game and you're effectively an NPC. You're going out, you're doing your job. It doesn't change the outcome of the game. But there's also something that's, at least for me, unfun about, okay, I have to be on top of my game the whole time, and I've got to make sure everything goes right from start to finish.
Mm-hmm.
And there's sometimes I want a game like that. There's sometimes I'm playing with friends and I want to say, okay, I'm that guy. Everyone's relying on me. And there's some games where it's just like, kind of just want to screw around. I want to, like, I'll do the right thing most of the time, but I'm gonna like go for something that's maybe a little bit risky or a little bit wrong or a little bit like out there. I'm gonna dive when maybe I shouldn't dive, and it shouldn't feel like, oh, the entire course of the game changed because of that. Mm-hmm. And it just feels like, oh, I can't take any risk, or the less risk I take, the better off I am, because I'm waiting for the other tank to make a mistake. And oftentimes when you're facing another tank that's equal or better than you, you're just saying, all right, I need to not make a mistake so that the rest of my team has a chance to do this. And I'm not usually the type of person that says, oh, this person's better than me, I can't beat them. I like to think, oh, this person's better than me, I need to play better, I need to improve. But having to play that play style of I just can't make a mistake is a really miserable place to be.
Yeah.
So that's my opinion on tank in the current place, where it very much feels like if you want to play tank, your whole team is reliant on you, and all of their toxicity is going to come at you if things are going wrong. And so It just feels miserable to play with people who are not your friends, for lack of a better term.
Oh, it's definitely a worse game to solo queue these days.
Oh,
like, I don't know if I ever solo queue anymore, because what are you getting out of it? Yeah.
And if you want to rank up, that's your best chances to probably end up solo queuing at this point, because you're going to be able to just run more games. You can try and duo, but
it is the absolute dilemma right now of, do you want to go solo queue and take the chance that your teammates are toxic and that you're up with another group or whatever it be, and just have that kind of experience of everyone. It is Overwatch right now feels like a series of 1v1s. They talk about supports now having the ability to duel other DPS heroes. And I think that's healthy that they have escape mechanisms and defense mechanisms against people diving, because I think that's always been one of the most frustrating things as a support hero, is just the feeling of uselessness when you could be as far away from the fight as you want, but that flanking Reaper or that diving Winston, you have nothing. So I think a little bit of power is healthy there. But the fact that it's all 1v1s, when you're solo queuing, it almost feels like no hope for a coordinated team game, which is what it should be at the end of the day. Whereas at least with your friends, you might have a little bit harder time ranking up, but at least you're in a cooperative space where you feel like you have people you can rely on, and you're not just playing 1v1 simulator. or spawn simulator as it feels some days. So it is that dilemma right now of how do you even play the game? What's the most optimal way to have fun?
In a lot of the other games too that have these types of roles, they'll typically have a particular role for each player that is actually playing the game. And this way here, you'd actually have more avenues to balance the game from, right? In League of Legends, there's 5 roles. Typically in Valorant, I think there's 4, but then you have your flex, which doubles up on one of the other roles, which depends on the map. It's Counter-Strike, similar thing, right? Having something like that and splitting them up to where you have to queue as, flex DPS, or you have to queue as main support, or, hit scan, I think could be a little bit more interesting, because this way here you have a little bit more ability to adjust certain roles on how you want them to play. And you'd also be able to nerf a specific group of characters a little bit more, rather than doing these blankets like, okay, DPS, if they hit you, it's minus 20%. Well, maybe that only goes to the flex DPS. And then the hit scans, it's, something else, right? Maybe they get bonus criticals. Something along those lines.
Because I want to come back to it.
Okay.
That's my
real
argument.
quick.
I've been
real
spewing
quick.
that for months.
Right.
Because I think this is just an important thing to talk about, because we did already mention it. In 6v6, we talked about tank synergies and how some of them could feel really good and some of them felt really bad. Nox, you mentioned double shield in particular. Like that was a rough comp. It was an awful thing to play against. I liked playing it, but I also liked playing Orisa.
And ball.
Yeah, I did love ball. Who doesn't love ball? Ball's fun.
Dude, the ball days.
I love OG. I love OG Venom. For anybody who's playing Marvel Rivals right now, do we think that if we were to return to 6v6, that we'd have to have different philosophies? What sort of different philosophies will we have to coming into tank design?
So the game right now is a mess, simply because you have maps that have been created specifically for 6v6. I know I brought this up on like a previous podcast, is that there are certain maps that feel too big right now for 5v5 because they were meant to be played 6v6. But now you have maps that were created and game modes that were created with 5v5 in mind and the balance of 5v5 in mind, especially the push. Like, can you imagine push with 6? Those maps feel pretty small, but Coliseum, if you're going up the stairs, can you imagine 12 people on those stairs? Like, think about that in that choke, where it is that like up and then on that bridge area. I think it's after like the second point on push. That's going to be a mess. And there are other maps and other examples of that already, where there's going to be these areas that are going to be far too small right now for 6v6, especially if you have 2 tanks in that area. And so you're going to have a really hard time just developing where you need to go. It's easy to do character adjustments. It's impossible to do map adjustments at this point. And they showed that from going from 1 to 2 without making major map changes. Yes, they might be able to do it, but we've seen they're not willing to, right? I think
they
I
are. They're just doing it very slowly.
And like
they're not even optimized. The ones that they're changing, they're not even, in my opinion, optimizing for 5v5. They're making changes that should have always been made.
Yeah,
exactly.
Like
and
the
glass is gone.
Right.
Or what's the big map change on Watch Point Gibraltar? Like those were quality of life changes. To have access to the high ground, more evident to people, and more accessible choke points. Like that wasn't optimized for 5v5. If anything, that opened the map.
Right.
Yeah. Before we go off on the side tangent, or really quick side tangent, before we go back into tank synergies, who here actually finds it like a major difference between balancing 9 other players and 11 other players? I don't find
Damn, y'all alt track? That's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, especially when you're playing casually, it doesn't make any difference.
Also, visual clutter, get out of here. There were a few things in this that I was like, you know what? If that is what your philosophy is, then that makes sense. If this was your goal, then that makes sense. There were certain things thrown in, like visual clutter or tracking alts, that I'm just like, now we're just grasping at straws trying to throw things at us. Because, and maybe this is just because I grew up on Overwatch. I not grew up. This is my first FPS game, really. So this is what I know. So maybe the 6v6 visual clutter was just what I got used to because it's what I always played. And maybe
But
it's
then they've
crazy
gone
to
and did
people.
all these particle effects, and here's new skins that add other effects, and here's some
Y'all
new
ever been
mythic
in a
weapons.
Mauga alt?
Yeah.
Hmm.
I'm
Like-
gonna go hard here. I'm calling absolute bullshit on the fact that the game can't handle 6 players. One, any one of us can hop into a custom match right now and set up a 6v6. The game can
Sure.
absolutely fucking handle it. May not be able to handle it in every situation, because I know that they were having issues at one point where, like, if 9 people popped their ult at once, it would crash the game server, but that's a server issue. Sorry, you guys should be working on that. That's kind of like the point of the game server. The fact that the game I have trouble running on a 1080 Ti, which, yes, it's a 9-year-old graphics card, but at the same time, it's not a bad graphics card, and every single update that gets pushed, it seems like they're tanking my frame rate. If you guys want to actually optimize it, go fucking optimize it. Because
Yeah.
the 1080 Ti still performs at what? It's like a 3070, 4060 level performance. It's like the cheapest graphics card you can get these days.
Mm.
Sorry, I'm pissed off at that line.
It does feel like, whether or not it's true, put it in Schrodinger's box and call it whatever you want. If it is true, then at least it's something that they're working on and trying to optimize for this to come out. If it's not true, then they're just lying about it, which is not great, but it's buying them time.
Which, at this point, we do have to take everything with a grain of salt. Task, you mentioned earlier the swap to Overwatch from Overwatch 1 to Overwatch 2.
Mhm.
What was that change really about
Queue
at
times.
this point?
No, it was queue times. I don't think there's really any argument that it wasn't.
They were like, hey, it's 5v5, which I think it's good that they're walking it back, but we'll get there.
Mhm.
Battle Pass has a new game engine, which I will props to the game engine. For the most part, it actually does work really well. And I do think that a lot of the visual updates work great.
Mhm.
The game looks better.
Yeah. It sounds better.
Oh, the sounds are probably
once they fixed the sound issues.
Yeah. One thing that I thought was, sorry, we're going to tangent further because I don't want to lose this one, thought was really interesting that they didn't mention about all of this is something that Paradox talks about all the time when it comes to 5v5, and that they didn't mention esports.
Mm.
Well, why would they? Don't have an esports league anymore.
Which is funny. This is all funny. This is all funny, full circle. But I would have thought that even if it's a 2-line comment of like, we wanted to match up with the rest of the market in terms of trying to promote our game as an esport.
Yeah.
So I think that's such a valid point. While people might not want to hear that or like to hear that because they're not a collegiate esport player or a professional esport player, even though those don't really exist anymore for Overwatch. Yeah, kind of.
Saudi money. Saudi money.
Yeah.
It's that bag.
It's all there.
Get
But,
your
like,
money.
It's, even though that doesn't apply to probably 99% of the player base, it's still a valid, from a marketing standpoint, from a selling your game standpoint, like, it still makes sense. So I thought that was interesting, that I thought that's like a big, no one can dispute that point of why 5v5 might be the better place to go for your game, and it wasn't brought up.
Yeah.
I don't know
think
if
they've
there's
thrown in
further
the
discussion on that. I don't know.
I think
But-
they're done with the esports. They don't know how to do it in a smart way at this point, and the game is
Well,
not.
they don't know how to do a lot of things
running
in
in
a
a way
smart
that they're
way.
happy
Good
with.
Lord.
So to be fair, I think they're honestly waiting for the full Microsoft purchase because we're still waiting on that to come through too.
Fair.
To actually like dive in and see what they're going to do with like their esports side. I think that's what a lot of people have kind of said too. But if we look at the only other game that Microsoft has in terms of an esport, we can also see they killed that one too, Halo. It's done in basically a major structure. Halo's been kind of bad in terms of their esports side of things, and it's also been a dying game and a dying breed since Microsoft took over. So, it
We're not
doesn't
in
look
good
right,
hands.
right? Like,
We miss you so much, Bungie.
well, I mean, of course, but
Do
the
you miss them enough
Halo,
to play Destiny 2?
yeah, yeah, that's another one that's also
Yeah.
kind of died too. So, making my point here,
Destiny 2 is
like,
a weird one. We're not going to go into that.
it's
Okay.
still these games that Microsoft kind of has and has died, but you have Saudi money, and like we don't know how long this is going to last. We know that the money's been there for a really long, or like the money's there, and there's a crap ton of money right now. There's way too much money right now, and it's not sustainable. So let's see where the E-League goes. Let's see. But even looking at the numbers, Overwatch is still doing well in South Korea, but it's not really doing well anywhere else. Like it's losing to a lot of the other games that are just kind of out there. So yeah, it's still big in South Korea, but for how long? So
Let's steer back real quick. So, tank synergies, because we didn't get a chance for Nox or Tess to be able to put in their thoughts on this. I know Nox in particular is probably going to have some spicy takes. Tess,
Always do.
what are your thoughts?
I
Do you
think that
miss Orisa Sig?
No. Specifically, I don't miss old Orisa. I think that the pull was fun, but it wasn't a good hero. Like it was just Ryan with a gun too much of the time. Like Balsig was fun.
Balsig was fun.
Balsig
I
was
liked
a
Ball
good
Ryan.
fun. Ball Ryan was interesting. There were a lot of just like different nuances of things that you could do and just fun that could be had. And okay, there's like a main tank and an off tank, and the off tank has to worry about healing themselves and knowing where the like when and where and how to get the health packs and what your job was. And that was just there was something beautiful about that, and it felt like I learned it. I was getting there, and then it just disappeared. So I'm sad that it's gone. But like MTD was a thing. Do you guys remember MTD?
I sure do.
Nox, what are your thoughts?
I've got a lot of them. For a non-tank player, I have a lot of them. Quick comment on task. I am sad in the sense of like nostalgia based that tank synergies are gone. The way I would pay to have Flats and Emong duo again on a YouTube video, I'm hoping whatever game mode they create here that we're gonna get a lot of content from that, and I'm very excited just from a nostalgia standpoint of like that's where my Overwatch learning began, was really watching those two play.
Mm.
I go back and forth on tank synergies because the biggest problem I saw with having two tanks in Overwatch 1, and my complaint always as a support player, was that there was a structure to picking the two tanks. If you picked Rhine, you had to pick an off tank. If someone picked Hog or Diva, you had to pick a main tank. There were those few tank synergies that you could do two off tanks. Two main tanks rarely worked. You have a Rhine and Orisa, GG. I remember Diva Hog works. There's a few of those. Off tanks were a little bit more flexible in that they could play together. But if you picked a bad tank synergy, good game, we're done.
Mm.
That was my biggest complaint with tanks, because it just felt like if you had a bad tank synergy, the other team picked a good one, there's just no way you're winning the game. My biggest problem with tanks in Overwatch 2 is the fact that if you're playing Doomfist into a Hog, or what are some bad tank matchups right now? Spit them out there, whatever it is.
Mauga
Divas
versus
are
anything.
still pretty.
Like if you pick the wrong tank, you lose. GG. So the problem, my spiciest hot take here is we didn't fix the problem. The problem still exists in that if you pick the wrong tank, you will lose. But in Overwatch 1, at least you had someone to rely on. There was a little bit more of a chance.
That kind of goes back to what Paradox was saying, that Overwatch is still a very hard game for you to learn one character at a time. Even if you lock into one role, you can very rarely get away with saying, "Okay, I know how to play this one character very well, and it's going to work this well, and I'm going to get better, and I'm going to, all of my games are going to go a little bit better as long as I keep getting better." Because I can't just say, "All right, I'm going to learn Diva and be very good at Diva and play Diva every game, and every game is going to be okay because at least I'm very good at Diva, or I'm this good at Diva." Because if one game, okay, I'm just getting hard countered, it's a Czar, it's a Mei, it's a Sim, it's any number of different things that the other team can do that just makes my game miserable. And like, I can either go down from like being gold or plat level diva to being worth a silver level tank, or I can say, all right, I'm gonna switch, I'm gonna go play Monkey now, I'm gonna go play Ramatra right now. Like, there has to be a way to learn one character at a time in which it's not just, oh, this counter swap really takes away from everything that I'm doing, or makes it much more difficult for me to be able to be effective in my role in a way that I'm not at that level yet.
My other thoughts on this too are that in general, this is a general thought towards Blizzard, don't have a lot of faith in whatever's coming next because nothing has seemed to work. I think the Battle Pass, in my opinion, has been really the only productive thing that has come out of Overwatch 2, if you want to call it that. The game looks better. That's cool. A hot take, whatever. When we had before Overwatch 2 came out, we had that year and a half of nothing, right?
Mm-hmm.
There were no balance changes. We were playing the same meta for 18 months. It was miserable because it was the same game for 18 months. I would be curious to see with the more active dev team that we have now, what that would have looked like. But that being said, in my opinion, Overwatch 2 has shown that they don't really know how to balance this game. They haven't cracked it yet. They're still throwing things at a wall and seeing what's sticking. They're trying new things, which I applaud them for. They're trying to figure it out. But like Paradox talked about, we're not seeing map changes for 5v5. We're only optimizing for 5v5 right now. I don't have a lot of faith that if we did go back to 6v6, that we would see game-changing changes to re-optimize for that. Like, that's a lot of moving parts that I don't know if Blizzard is willing to do. So I have a lot of distrust in that. Part of me is like, just keep your head down and keep moving forward, and maybe 5v5 will work one day, because I don't know if we're too off the deep end to go back.
I've got a rant about trusting Blizzard, but I'm going to hold off for 2 seconds and just real quick talk about saying tank synergies. I think overall it fixes a couple of big issues with the game. I think the fact that just having 2 tanks does mean you can kind of cover each other's butts a little bit easier. I think, we talk about like, so Diva Czar is probably the easiest interaction to pick out and just be like, Czar wins that matchup. Pretty much 9 times out of 10. There's rare instances where, Czar's low charge or your ult gets eaten, but for the most part,
a little less now. Diva got a big buff. She's
Diva's
strong
been
right now.
pretty buffed right now, but in general, Zarya,
there's still so little you can do against Zarya.
Exactly.
Like, once a Zarya shows up, you have to totally change the way you play.
And I think that going
and
back
it's not
to
shoot the
6v6
Zarya
model was, even if you don't have like hard synergies, I think hard synergies is something to avoid. I don't think we should go back to a double shield. I don't think we should go back to Reinzar you could play around.
Hog and ball torture.
Hog and ball was a pretty rough one. That was a lot of CC.
Mm.
There were
Bring back
certain
CC.
synergies.
Good lord.
There were a couple of synergies that were really rough, but for the most part, I think it was good that you had tanks with certain exploitable weaknesses but really big strengths. So like Diva's defense matrix is pretty fucking amazing. I mean, I'm just gonna stand here and shield everything as long as it's not a beam. Anything else, as long as it's not a beam. And I think that was a good tank philosophy, whereas Mauga is not a tank philosophy. I like playing Mauga. I think he's fun. I understand where a lot of the player base doesn't like him.
But he's the reason Ryan can't exist anymore. Because we're
Exactly.
getting the new philosophy and the characters that came out in 2016 with their identity that they still have cannot exist.
Mm-hmm. And I do think he definitely falls into the same playground as like a hog. And I don't like that. And I would like to see a move away from that philosophy, but I also don't see how we're going to do that in the current way the state of the game. As for trusting Blizzard right now, don't fucking do it. I mean, holy fuck. We're going to Overwatch 2 because we want to upgrade our engine, we want to introduce Battle Pass, we want to go to 5v5, and we want to do story mode. What was it? What the hell did they originally call it? PvE. We want to do PvE, and we're going to do all of these skill trees, and we're going to do a whole bunch of stuff with lore. Oh, by the way, we released this game for a year and a half, and we ditched our PvE. Also, by the way, we fired our lore team. Oh, now we're thinking about going back to 6v6. My fucking god. There is no good reason to trust Blizzard right now.
No.
There really isn't. So no, you shouldn't fucking trust them. However, with that said,
I'm gonna lose it. That's
I'm
the
excited
most
for
animated
changes.
I've ever seen you on this podcast. Holy shit. That was hilarious.
I'm trying. I am excited for the changes. Let's talk about what's going to come next. What has Blizzard said that they're going to do? Because if they actually follow through with this, I might actually begin to actually have some fucking hope in them. We're getting some stuff in Season 12. They're going to try 6v6.
Mm-hmm.
They haven't said what that's going to look like. They said it's going to look different.
It's not.
And it does sound like 6v6 is going to be its own game mode, which I think is really interesting because I still have
hacked.
the firm. It's not going to be the hacked. They specify new game mode. So it's not going to be quick play hacked. It's going to be its own separate thing, at least from what they've said this far. I think it'll be really interesting considering if they don't balance the tanks for a 6v6 mode. This is going to be awful. This is going to be really bad. Which part of me on Blizzard's side is probably like, let's not balance it because then they're going to see that it's awful and people will get off our dick. You know, like.
Has anyone played OpenQ semi recently?
No.
Because the tanks are completely differently balanced over there.
They have different numbers?
Yeah.
Yes.
Really?
Their damage numbers are the same, if for the most part, if I recall.
The
Their
lower
health pools are lower.
That's crazy. I hope they do that because I think it would be an interesting test if tanks are balanced to have two of them rather than one, because they are gigabuffed right now in terms of the Overwatch 1 standard because they live by themselves.
Yep.
When the balance came out for season 1 of Overwatch 2, which obviously tanks had their heyday back then, they were huge and scary, and it was not a good time to be a support player. But
except for Hog. Hog didn't have any changes.
Don't get me started tonight. I hope they do maybe just pull in then the open queue changes that they have for them and let that run. The other thing that they did talk about is they didn't specify anything about it.
Yep.
But they talked about some changes that they wanted to make to 5v5. So this would include a quick play hacked or a different arcade mode that they're trying to test, it seems, to see if they can solve some more problems that are currently happening with 5v5. So it sounds like in Season 12, they're going to try to kill two birds with one stone. They're going to run 6v6 and see what happens. They're going to play test it, see what the community thinks. Once again, like I talked about earlier, it does sound like they're going to run it for more than a few days, which is good because I think if it only ran for a weekend, nostalgia would hit hard and we would all want that back. So I think it'll be good that it'll run for a few weeks, hopefully. They can watch player numbers. Did it stay the same? Did it drop after the first weekend? You know, all that good stuff. Like, how are people feeling about it? But it's nice that they're also looking to take quick play and make some changes there to see what they can do to 5v5. Because I think that's what they have to do right now. They have to test all of their options. They have to figure out what the community wants, what's working best. But I still stand behind the fact that if they can't fix queue times, 6v6 is never coming back. If they can't find a fix to that, which there is no clear answer to that right now, none at all. I don't know because the larger issue is making tank fun and impactful.
Yep.
And if you're not doing that and they can't find the magic numbers to balance these things, then it's just queue times are going to be awful.
I
And
will throw out there,
Yeah.
I think 6v6 with the DPS passive now is a much more interesting conversation because you've given DPS a big reason to exist.
Right. Because that does start to address the problem of DPS players felt unimpactful for queue times of over 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So I think as long as, and I remember Flats, as soon as I read this director take, I went immediately and knew that Flats had already done an hour video on it. And of course he had. So I sat down and watched that. And I just lost my train of thought, which is super cool.
It's okay. You're not on a live podcast, so.
Yeah. Really thought my squishy bear was going to help me keep these things together. It didn't. Anyway, someone else take over. I'll tell you if I think about it again.
Damn you, bear.
Yeah.
All I'm saying is put me in charge. 3v3. Still an advocate for that. Just going to throw that out there. Yep. 3v3. I'm telling you, one tank, one DPS, one support. You give them multiple guns, right? And so you have the tank that's able to do damage and, be tanked.
So we're playing Apex now.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, the game is more popular, right? Like, why not? But you just have the fun Overwatch aspect of it too. And then you make the map smaller, and that's how you balance it. You have your 3 roles, right? It goes back to what I was saying earlier, where it's like, if you have 5 roles and you actually balance to those 5 roles, it's different.
Mhm.
Or even in this case, 6 roles. If you make those 6 roles in this way here, you can do exactly what they're doing with the DPS here. Give a passive to main tanks, right? Main tanks are shit. Give them a passive. Okay? We're going to make all the characters that are labeled main tanks do this thing, right? All the DPS characters. Hey, this buff is too strong. Okay, all the flex DPS characters are going to do this, and all the hit scan characters are going to do this. You do lose it in terms of player entry, where the more complex and the more passives you give and the more issues you give with the games, that those nuances are going to not fall on the new players. But at least you're going to keep your core, and you may be going to get the new players. League still is getting more loot players. So
yes, exactly. I was gonna agree with you on that. I don't understand League at a greater
still getting new players.
But I still like to play it from time to time because I have my mobalytics up telling me what to buy. Which works for me.
14-year-old game.
Yeah.
14 years that game's been around. And it's still getting a shit ton of new players. And you have the old people like me who have been playing it since pretty much the beginning. And it's like, I still fucking love that game. And Overwatch, yeah, the only time I'm queuing up Overwatch is when I have to re-download it to my computer and play with y'all. Like, that's the only time I play Overwatch. But League, I think I played 2 games earlier today. Hearthstone, I even play Hearthstone on my own, right? Like,
so don't talk about hours in Hearthstone right now.
Blizzard knows how to make good games, right? Like, it just, they need to decide what they actually want to do with this game. If they're gonna make 5v5, make it 5 unique roles, balance for those 5 roles. If you're not gonna make it 5v5 and you're only gonna keep your 3 roles, do my idea, hire me, Blizzard, and I will get you 3v3. And I swear it'll be a fun game, and we'll have a lot of people play the game. Pay me many monies.
I thought it was so interesting.
Paradox Views 2024.
Hell yeah. Aaron Keller, we're coming for you. Anyway.
With a different Aaron.
Correct. I thought it was so interesting that when they talked about the history of large game changes that they've gone through, so going from hero limits to roll queue, that they addressed that every time they made a game-changing decision, that it did bring down the freedom that players have to create compositions. Every time it limited them. And the same thing happened with 5v5. It continues to limit them. So they're obviously not scared to make changes that limit the creativity of team compositions and how you play the game. So per their line of thinking, the 5 roles make sense. I'm waiting for it. I think it makes sense. I've been on this soapbox for too long, but I'd be so interested.
I think there's definitely merit to the 5 roles. I'm curious to see how that would play out. I think there's also...
Or 6 roles. Bring it all back.
I was going to say, there's also the argument for 6 roles, which could be very interesting. And it would be it would be a different level of balancing. I think you could do some things like you you could increase, if you had off tanks, you could be like, oh yeah, well now Diva has more mobility, and now Zarya, maybe her bubbles don't last as long, but maybe she has 3 of them. You
Or
could
they're
make the off
bigger.
tank, or they're bigger. Like, you could really kind of go all in on like, okay, off tank now has a very different type of job, and you could actually start playing with ranges and how they function.
They're trying to
You could
balance
also
two
kind of
open game
double
right
down.
now.
You could also kind of double down on some DPS heroes and be like, okay, Reaper now is like, we have, enforcers as a role, let's say. And you have Reaper and Mei and these kind of traditional heroes who have a big
Orb. Anyone
around
that-
them that you kind of want to avoid.
Yeah.
And you can be like, yeah, we're going to really balance these heroes and make that a role that you can really kind of play around.
100%.
And we can
100%.
finally have a comp where you don't need to deal with Sombra Mei.
Buff Sombra, kill the game.
Ugh.
Where's Bandito? Did he just say that? Crazy.
No, he'd
Let's
say the game
channel
needs to
him
die.
every time.
He'd
Sorry,
say
let
the
me
game needs to
rephrase.
die and be put in the grave and left forever.
Let it die. There we
Let
go.
it die. Sorry, Task.
Hmm?
It seemed like, did you want to chip in on this?
No.
That's
You're not
fine.
excited for the changes in any way, shape, or form, or have negative feelings toward them, or upcoming changes?
I'm excited. I think that it's going to be a fun new adventure. I'm glad that they're actively doing something all of the time, as opposed to what we saw towards the end of Overwatch 1, which was pretty miserable.
When they were working on PvE. Smile.
Yeah, working on PvE. I mean,
Sorry.
it's good that we know what they're doing, that we have some idea of what's coming up. I'm glad that it's not just this game will happen in the next 1 year, no 2 years, no 4 years. We're going to eventually have a sequel and it's going to be this, no this, no this, no that. At this point, they've been pretty reliable of saying this is the change that we're trying to make. This is the roadmap that we're laying out. This is what we're going to do. And they're following through on it. So
After a bunch of lies.
after a poor history of decision making and reliability. So I think that they've been pretty consistent about doing something different and something new that's meaningful and worth trying. So I'm looking forward to it.
Certainly hoping this is it.
I don't think the game's dead. I don't think that this 5v5 is so terrible, and whatever comes next, give it a try.
Before we completely wrap up, let's just touch on it real quick. Have y'all looked at or played any of Marvel Rivals?
I haven't
Yeah.
played it, but I've seen some.
It's a little scary how similar it looks.
Oh yeah, I've watched it.
It's meant to be. Like, come on. Let's just not let's not hide it. It was meant to be similar. Like,
Yeah.
There's only so many things you can do within a particular genre, right? Where
I came across a TikTok by TikTok by Flats.
There you go.
And it was just amazing. It was just him playing Venom and going, oh, he's like Wrecking Ball. Oh, no, he's totally different. Here's his grapple. It's totally different. Oh, and here's his slam. That's totally different.
yeah. It's
Power World all over again. Good
I was
lord.
gonna say there's always gonna be those clones with Pal World. There's like MOBA clones all the time, but it really comes down to quality over quantity. Like if Marvel Rivals is the better game, then it's going to stick around. Look at Multiverses. Look at Nickelodeon All Stars Brawl. Both of those have been honestly the second one specifically with NASB being a complete and utter commercial failure, and Multiverses being like one of the most disastrous game things that I think I've ever seen within the past 20 years. Just realistically. And both of those games were slated to be quite good to the point where, Riot has to be really, really scared about theirs, which is like 2KO, I think is what it's being called. I can't remember. They're making a fighting game, but it's going to be much more of the traditional fighter like Street Fighter and Tekken rather than like a platform fighter like Smash. So we'll see, right? If it's a better game, then it's going to last longer. Look at Valorant. Valorant kind of usurped Counter-Strike, there for a while. And once Counter-Strike 2 came out, Counter-Strike 2 was not as much of a success as they thought it was going to be, considering because, again, their player base dipped. They didn't want to play that old game again because there's a new and better game that came out, Valorant. So if you're going to have a competitor that's going to make a better game, then hell yeah, that's what free market's all about.
The one comment I've heard about Marvel Rivals that I think hits it right on the nail and I think is absolutely fucking hysterical is people being like, oh, they went and listened to everything that the Overwatch players complain about and hate, and they added more of it. Overwatch players don't like flying heroes, so we're going to make half our roster fly.
Also, hey, Aaron Keller, you want to see visual clutter? Go watch 5 minutes of Marvel Rivals.
It's a bit rough.
You don't know what's going on at any given time.
Yeah. It's definitively worse than Overwatch.
Good.
It looks clunky, though. I will say I've never played it. I don't know how it feels when you play it. It looks clunky. I'm assuming if this game continues to get some amount of exposure and success, that probably some of that engine will get upgraded, but
I'm actually going to throw it out there. I don't think it's the engine.
Mm.
I have a feeling that the reason why it looks weird is actually because I'm guessing that they're probably trying to animate it like they did for Spider-Verse.
It's also in third person, which doesn't work with my brain. Like, watching
Also,
Fortnite doesn't make sense to me. So that might be a personal
help with visual
thing.
clutter either.
No. That just might be a Nox thing. It's just a lot.
But it's great for spelling skins.
Oh, yeah. If I could see my mythic skins when I was wearing them, I'd have all of them. Nah, I just get to flex on the other team.
Feel that way about buying clothes.
Hell yeah.
Speaking of the real world,
live my life.
Let's go into our real world segment. This is the part of the show where we like to talk about things going on in our lives that might be related to video games, but may not. Maybe things like movies we're watching, music we're listening to, books we're reading, other things that are going on in our life that just are different. Paradox, what do you got going on?
I don't even think. Someone hit my car. That was fun.
Oh.
They backed
You don't
into
have a
my
cheap
car. No, I don't. But at least I had it on camera, so that was pretty cool. So
Did they try to run?
No, they didn't actually try and run, but it was really funny because, again, called the insurance up and it was just like, yeah, you want the video? Here's like an hour video of it showing me sitting in a parking lot and then this person just backed into my car. So that was pretty fun. So now I'm driving a Dodge Charger and my initial car is a Tesla, right? So I had to go to a gas station for the first time in about a year. That was really, really funny just to be like, oh my gosh, I'm pumping gas right now after like a year of just not pumping. This is awful. So it was very first worldly problem, but it was also very funny and comical and being like, I miss my car. I miss like it would do this thing, or you know, like certain aspects of it where actually that's a big one. I now realize like how much it gets in your brain of how like if you're driving your car you're just used to the things your car does. Like mine, you got in, you press the brake and the car turned on, right? You put it in park and you go. Now I'm getting in and I'm like, why isn't it moving? A lot of like start to press the gas pedal, like try and shift, and I'm like, oh, that's right, I got to turn the car on, right? I've gotten out and left it running when I went inside. That was fun too. So you know, just all these little things that I have to get used to for 2 weeks while I have this car. But
First
that was
world
the
problems. Good Lord.
That was the bad news. The good news is I did go back to a Magic pre-release tournament this Friday and won. That was a lot of fun. So
Hell yeah.
I'll give good news and bad news there. But absolutely big MTG player. Bloomberg is a fantastic set. Any MTG people listening, go buy more of it. It's really good.
Did you bring Caspian Siono?
Huh?
Did you go with Caspian?
No. I didn't even think about that. I will invite Caspian next time.
Poker.
So, because yeah, there'll be another one this Friday that I don't know if I'm going to end up going to, but definitely was a really, really good pre-release, really great set. It's all about woodland creatures this time around. So it was very much they tried catering to a more feminine audience, which was really interesting. They reprinted a bunch of planeswalkers too, and like the lore of the plane is when you planeswalk to it, you get turned into an animal. So it's basically just revealing all of the planeswalkers' personas, and it's very funny of just like, oh, yep, Jake's is a fox now. That's didn't want to know that, but here he is. He's a fox. Liliana's a squirrel. Sure, that's why not. Yep. Now here, Elsbeth is a mouse. How's that one? So, anyways, yep, that's my story. Personas, magic, and hitting cars. Oh, Karn's a tree. He doesn't get a fursona. He just turns into a tree. he's just a tree. It's fine. He's the tree of life.
That's actually fucking great.
In the art on it, phenomenal. Go look up the Karn art from Bloomborough. The art is very good in this set too. So, those are my rants.
They always nail the art though.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah. Task, what do you got? What's going on in your life?
I caught up, rewatched Dragon Prince Mystery of Erebos on Netflix. And then the new season came out on Friday. I watched that on Saturday this weekend. Very good. It's very interesting. The last season is weird. It feels like they've kind of solved and beaten what they needed to do, and then things just kind of go in a different direction. I'll put it that way. But yeah, it was very enjoyable. I definitely recommend the series to anyone who hasn't seen it yet. If you've got the time, the energy, and the attention span.
Check it out.
Oh, it is from the people who made Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Oh,
so
nice.
You should lead with that.
Yeah, I should lead with that. That's and there's a whole bunch of like small like throwbacks to it. The person who does like the main person, one of the main characters, Callum, is voiced by the person who voiced Sokka from The Last Airbender. And so they do like a boomerang. Like he picks something up and he's like, boomerang? It's great.
Knox, what do you got going on in your life?
Where do I start? So it's been a couple weeks. Real TLDR. So everyone knows, if you listen to this podcast, that it's going to be my concert summer. That I'm going to a lot of concerts. Well, I went to Hosier a while ago. We talked about that. In the time that I've talked to you guys, I tried to go to a Noah Khan concert. But Alpine Valley Amphitheater outside of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, decided to have no cell service and then have an extreme storm roll through. Like, ever seen a block of red coming at you on a radar that you couldn't look at the radar because nobody knows what's going on, and the show's supposed to start at 8, and then at 8:10 they're like, everyone needs to fucking leave. So me and Gig, who has been on the show before, had to shelter in place at an expo up the hill from Alpine Valley for about 3 hours until they told us that the show was postponed, in which we then had to leave. So Noah Khan's postponed. We're going to that back in again in September. Other concert update. Last night I went and saw All Time Low, which, oh my god. I saw them when I was 16 years old. They didn't play Remembering Sunday. When I was 16 years old, I saw them at the same concert venue I saw them at last night. I remember having the time of my life when I saw them. But they're on their, like, they're calling it the All Time Low Forever tour. It's their greatest hits. They're kind of doing they're playing songs from every single album. This was the 20th show that they've played at the concert venue that I saw them at. It is the most played venue they have. They're also from Baltimore, so it doesn't make sense that Milwaukee, Wisconsin is their most played city, but they've been to the rave 20 times. They decided to do a more intimate show, so it was probably only 1,500 people there. And I made my lovely boyfriend stand in line outside for a long time to make sure that I was about 10 feet from the stage. I cried. I got to hear Therapy in person, live. That's a song that got me through my teenage years, and I bawled last night because I didn't think I'd ever have the chance to listen to that live, because that song came out in 2009. So that was a really, really cool experience. I could talk about it for 4 hours. It was amazing. And Alex Gaskarth still has my heart. Love that man. I also, last tidbit, caved and bought a Switch today. So maybe some actual Pokemon knowledge will come from me after this, but we have started my Animal Crossing island again.
Oh, jeez.
Which will be my third island of all time. And I don't remember a lot from the last one, so I'm still kind of traipsing around, not really knowing what to do next, because all I remember is terraforming, and we are not near that. So that's my really long real world segment. What do you got, Zach?
Oh gosh, I'm thinking about the fact that I'm driving a Hummer right now and I hate it.
Oh yeah.
Not an original Hummer. It's an H3, so it's at least a little bit more reasonable, I guess, if you can even call that reasonable. Oh, what have I been listening to? I've been listening to a lot of music lately. A lot of kind of spattering of stuff. I listen to a lot of random things. Been listening to a lot more Billy Joel lately, a lot of Boston. More Vienna Tang, who I really like. I think if I had to pick one thing, though, that's just kind of interesting and different, and especially because you mentioned All Time Low, does anybody here remember Pop Goes Punk and that whole series of albums?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so like 10 for Task and Paradox, about 10 years ago-ish, a couple of record labels decided to get a bunch of bands together, and they take a bunch of punk bands and have them cover pop songs, and they called it Pop Goes Punk. So like there's a phenomenal cover, for example, of somebody that I used to know, done by name Mayday Parade. And it's awesome. It was just a cool idea, because it was like the song that you've definitely heard and you understand and might even enjoy it to some extent. But then you get to hear it in this totally different vibe. And this past week or so, Disney has decided that apparently they're going to take their spin on this trend. And they've been bringing in punk bands to come and cover Disney songs. So the first one they did was Simple Plan covering Can You Feel the Love Tonight?
Ooh.
And they did a great job with it. And then the next one was Eye to Eye from the Goofy movie, done by Magnolia Park. Both of them have been absolutely awesome. I cannot wait for the rest of the album. Just super awesome listening, especially if you have connections to those Disney movies. Like it feels similar enough that you want to sing along and just feel that vibe. But at the same time, you're like, hell yeah, I can headbang to this.
For anyone curious, I did have to go look up a Punk Goes Pop album because I wanted to remember some of the good ones. And I couldn't remember the one that I was thinking of. But like, if you ever wanted to hear Pierce the Veil do Just the Way You Are by Bruno Mars, you can do that. If you've ever wanted to hear Yeah x3 by Chris Brown covered by All Star Weekend, you can do that. Or Fuck You by CeeLo Green.
CeeLo Green?
Done by Sleeping with Sirens. It's a good time. I'll have to follow back up with you guys about the one I'm thinking about, because there was a one that like, I Prevail did Blank Space. That was a big one.
Yeah.
That
they've done a lot of them,
circulated.
and there are some that are definitely more hits than misses and vice versa, but they're definitely worth checking out, especially if there's certain bands in there that you really want to go after.
Absolutely.
Anyway, we'll wrap it up there. Thanks everyone for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed our discussion. We release these episodes weekly, and we're going to keep trying to do that. If that's not often enough for you, though, come and join the Discord server. We're here far too often. If you have any thoughts you want to share with us, things that you like about the show, things you don't like about the show, you think we just sound like a cool group of people, and you want to probably get in some games, maybe some Overwatch, click that link down in the doobly-doo and get signed up. Taskless Paradox, thank you guys so much for joining us today. If you at home enjoyed our conversation today, think about hitting that subscribe button. It actually helps us out way more than we can explain very quickly. And we're hoping we'll see you in the next one. Bye.
Blizzard, do your job. Heart. I almost didn't.
Damn it!
Get fucked.